Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's Vickie Driver from Riverside Insights. You know me, I work on the COGAP program. And today we're here for the latest in our installment of Hear from Your Peers webinars. Today we will be talking with Jonathan Klingeman from State College, Pennsylvania Area School District. And the topic of our webinar today is increasing universal screening effectiveness through equitable processes for the underserved. So what does that mean? Boy, we have a lot to unpack, but first, let me handle the logistics. So we are recording this webinar, and yes, we will provide you a copy, a PDF copy of our slides. The webinar recording will be sent out as a link to everyone who has registered for today's session, along with the slides. And I'd like to remind you, as we go along through this conversation, we have a question panel. We have somebody live monitoring that question panel. So if you have questions, things you'd like us to clarify, other topics you'd like us to touch on, please hit that up in the question panel and we'll do our best to get to it during this session. I also want to let you know we have two upcoming webinars next Tuesday. That's next Tuesday, the 18th, tax day. We will be talking with the folks from Northwestern Center for Talent Development. So a Hear from the Experts webinar. And then on Thursday, April 27th, we will be doing another Hear from Your Peers with the folks from Trumbull County, Ohio. But let's get into today's session. All right, so State College Area School District, not surprisingly, that's in State College, Pennsylvania. We are meeting with our most excellent friend, Jonathan Klingeman, who has the dual title of Director of Federal Programs and Gifted Services. So like many of you, he is wearing more than one hat in his job. State College is a really interesting school district, and I gotta tell you, Pennsylvania is a pretty interesting state in terms of how they approach gifted identification and services. So we're going to unpack all of that. We met Jonathan last fall when we attended the Pennsylvania Gifted Conference, the PAGE Conference, where he did a presentation, and I've excerpted several slides from that for you to take a look at today. Following our meeting Jonathan and getting to know some of his issues and the kind of work that he's doing in the State College School District, we've kind of embarked on a co-research project with him. And so you're going to hear a little bit about that today as well. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce all of you to Jonathan Klingeman. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Vickie. Thank you so much for having me here today, and for all of you attending. I'm just so ecstatic to be able to talk about gifted with people that also love to talk about gifted. So this is a great opportunity, and thanks again for having me.
So let's talk real quickly about your school district in State College, Pennsylvania. Everybody should know, but if you don't know, that is the home to Penn State University. So it's a university town, and as we know, we see some special kinds of populations in university towns on both ends of it. But your district, first of all, you guys are what I would call a mid-sized district. You have close to 7,000 students and a lot of different kinds of schools in your district.
Yeah, so it's a really cool space and a really cool area, and you know, having the university there always has its ups and downs depending on the thought process, working with a lot of university professors, their feelings and understanding. They've traveled other states, they've been in other states, they've seen gifted the way that it's been. So we've been really working as a school district over the past probably 6 years to really start focusing on the Chapter 16 regulations, which is our school code's expectations for gifted education. 8 elementary schools. We have a really unique middle high school, democratic alternative school, and then a pretty robust high school that is really awesome that it has its CTC program actually embedded into the high school. So it's not a separate program, so students can actually take CTC classes as enrichment and elective classes and not necessarily have to be scheduled into an actual CTC program. So it's a really cool place that is ultimately changing as well. A large population of migrants, families have been moving into the areas. I know that's been around as well. And I also serve as our ESL director as well. So I'm dealing with several of those pieces. And we actually, Vickie, this is like perfect timing because I was just taking a look at our most updated data, which was just released yesterday. And our numbers are pretty close to the same here. For the most part, there's some that we can talk about as well that is a little outdated because of data reporting. But you know, we have a really robust community that is mostly locally funded. We don't get nearly as much federal and state dollars as the surrounding communities. And it's very interesting also the political scene from, you know, just within our community to as soon as you leave. There's pretty big differences and changes for the most part. But our demographics are changing, and we're continuing to try to take a look at equity and what that means and really be thoughtful of that. And part of my role is really looking at the ends of things. So I started my job with just looking at gifted students, and then that transferred also into working with our Title I and our struggling readers. That led into our school psychologists. That's also led into our ESL. And now we're really starting as a district to have conversations about what MTSS means as a framework and how we can continue to align that for all of our programs. And though I would love for gifted to be a part of those initial conversations now, we're having the bits of conversation, but really trying to focus on the unique needs on the other end of the spectrum for right now. But really focusing on professional development and driving conversations around how we can make sure that we're doing our best to follow the law. And unfortunately, the law is pretty restrictive. In fact, the state will tell you it's one of the most restrictive gifted identification states within the country. And for me, looking at an equity lens, it's sometimes really, really hard in having conversations with parents when we take a look at our robust process and then what that means moving forward. So I will say that when we take a look specifically, our gifted numbers that are there are actually much lower. We have a long history of where we've been with gifted. And in fact, when we talk about in Pennsylvania, which I know Vic will get into in a few minutes, we are actually up to about 9% of our district have been identified as mentally gifted. And then whether or not they have an IEP, whether they're twice exceptional, or whether they are gifted but are no longer presenting a need for specially designed instruction, it's a pretty robust number. And I can tell you that years ago, we were barely at 1% because of the long history that I'd be glad to share about where we've been and where we are now and kind of where we're headed.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So I went out there and kind of scraped the district's website. So you updated your numbers as of yesterday. Obviously, those are not on the website yet, but couple things I would like to point out from this slide. One is one of the things that we often know about university town school districts is you will have a lot of high performers in your school district. But this economically disadvantaged number, now Jonathan, I don't know how true this is.
I just pulled it. It's about 19% now.
Yeah, so that's still 1 out of every 5 students sitting in your school is economically disadvantaged. And we know that that often also carries with it some opportunity disadvantages with respect to education. So I think it's important to call that out, even for a high performing district that has, you know, this really great high school for your kids to move up to. You know, it's been called out nationally, it's been called out in the state. So you guys, as a university town, and particularly as we dive into the way Pennsylvania approaches GT, you guys have some pretty unique issues, I would say. So the other thing,
yeah, and I would probably say too that economically disadvantaged, Vickie, I'd probably say that my gut is that that's also actually a little bit lower I think that from my experience too, working within federal programs and around the state within that there are sometimes families when in more affluent areas are less likely to apply for free and reduced lunch and to do those types of things just out of like a pride piece as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if that number is, even though again, it is what it is, it may be even actually a little bit higher, but that's what's reported at this point. Yeah.
So Jonathan mentioned a minute ago, he said that this number for the kids who have the gifted IEP, this is way underreported and they're closer to 9% now. So we're going to talk about how they got there. But I want to give you all some context, or have Jonathan give you all some context about Pennsylvania. They do have a very strict approach. So in addition to scraping the website, I went back and scraped your presentation from Page this fall. And Jonathan, these slides should look familiar to you because these are your slides. So you mentioned Chapter 16.
So Chapter 16 is actually pretty new when we talk about gifted education, in my opinion. And Vickie, I know you know this, and I'll tell our friends that are here as well. I'm working on my dissertation specifically looking at this, and an action research project within our school district specifically. And State College School District has really been doing gifted, whether or not it has been effective or not, since the 1970s, if not before. Under parts of where IDEA had expectations for students to have an IEP, specifically those with 130. And then in 2000, that was actually established to this specific law just for gifted students. And what's interesting is I've read a lot of definitions of mentally gifted, and you're going to hear a lot of talk today about specially designed instruction and what that means. And I think Pennsylvania is a very unique state, because as a Commonwealth, we do not have county school systems. We have school districts. So there's almost 500 different school districts within the state of Pennsylvania. And when you take a look at this definition, you can see that, again, like many, it's not very clear, especially when you start using words like creative ability and what that means in determining giftedness, especially when we start to then talk about how we define that and how a student is actually identified with the title of being mentally gifted. So it's a very interesting state to be working in, and I can tell you a lot of the advocacy work that I do and stuff that I'm trying to do is taking a look at how, again, equity fits into such a restrictive piece, and also taking a look at, IQ scores and high thresholds, and understanding more about what other states are doing and what gifted research is saying, and how we can try to make sure that when we're casting out these nets for universal screening programs and even just professional development, that everyone understands that just because the law is what it is doesn't mean that it has to be that. So that's kind of what I would have to, that once I'm done with my dissertation, to be able to use it to really try to advocate for a little bit more flexibility per se, as long as the state is able to match that. And one other thing before you pass on to Vic that I wanted to make sure you understand and everyone knows is that Chapter 16 in gifted education in the state of Pennsylvania is an unfunded mandate. So school districts are required to provide services. They are required to follow Chapter 16, but there is $0 that is provided to the state specifically to implement that, which again makes it very, very challenging and sometimes a backdoor need or a backdoor experience for schools that are, struggling with finances right now. So that's why I'm really blessed to be in a school district that has the resources to be able to truly have conversations about what gifted education looks like and be able to take action on things that are not only maybe best practice, but also fit within our compliance regulations of the law.
Yeah, so the conversation that we're going to have is a little bit different because, we have some states that have a universal screening requirement at least one grade. They may mandate the assessment. Some states even fund the assessment. Some states establish cut scores. Other states say, it should be a local cut score. But the conversation in Pennsylvania is quite a bit different because it is a required, the strictest level of the requirement in Pennsylvania is an IQ score from an individually administered IQ assessment of 130 or above. So we're not having a conversation today about things like local norms And even the conversation that we have about universal screening is going to be a pretty wide-ranging one, because it means a lot of different things to people in your state. Attending your conference this fall was, quite honestly, a little bit of a head expander for me, because I met a lot of people at this conference who came in and said, yeah, I'm the new gifted and talented person in our district. It's the 12th hat I'm wearing. And we don't have any identified kids in our district. Is that a thing? And in a state that requires that you identify and serve gifted and talented students, I would say unless you have a school district of one and that one student is, clearly not gifted, you probably ought to have some kids that need a level of differentiation above and beyond what other kids have, because they're more capable learners. And so the way Pennsylvania is coming at this makes it problematic. So they require a gifted plan, but again, it's really open-ended. Do you have anything you want to say about this slide?
Yeah, so it's very interesting too, because for a long time, there was a compliance monitor through gifted education, but with so many school districts and so few resources, there really wasn't a good way to be able to really be assuring that things were happening in gifted education across the state. After a retirement, there was a silence for several years where there was no compliance monitoring. There was very little professional development happening because the state was in the process of trying to rebrand and rebuild from that retirement, which a couple years ago they did do. And since then, the state has now hired a compliance officer that is fully just working under Chapter 16 and helping school districts to maintain compliance, taking questions, et cetera. But they also have hired two technical assistance people, one on the western part of the state and one on the eastern part of the state, that part of their job is also to be working with our local intermediate units in terms of professional development. We just recently added into the comprehensive planning portal for Pennsylvania these gifted assurances. So school districts now, as they go through the process, are required to explain to the state, how are they providing universal screening? How are they providing services? What do all of those different pieces look like? And I can tell you, because I just went through it myself, when the state has questions, they're actually pushing back and they're asking for further clarification. So to just say that you administer a cognitive assessment as a screener would get it dinged and would get sent back. And the state's going to want to know, are you doing a brief intelligence test? Are you doing a group administered one? Are you somehow using other data points to then trickle that down into more individualized assessments? What does that specifically look like? So we're finally starting to have really good conversations about this, as well as trying to get data up to date. In just a few, I think it was just last year, I just had a conversation with the state about this, that there were still like 10 to 15 school districts that were reporting zero. Whether that meant that they just weren't reporting it accurately or whether they literally were doing nothing was a problem. I think there's only one school district now recently that is still reporting zero. So the communication and the conversation that's building around the state is starting to at least get a little bit more traction. And I know that in the next couple of years, we're adding in additional questions to the gifted assurances plans that school districts must submit as a part of their, their strategic planning, et cetera. That's also going to require them to talk about the professional development, the ongoing professional development around gifted education, and also data specifically related to disproportionality. So those are things that are going to start coming through. So school districts, unfortunately, are not going to be able to kind of dust this under the rug anymore. They're going to have to appoint people to really be taking a look at data and ensuring that we're doing the best that we can given the unfunded mandate around it.
Yeah, so I love this slide because of what it says on the bottom. In Pennsylvania, as you've pointed out, you have 500 school districts and 500 interpretations of what they need to do to meet this mandate. And I believe the state does have some requirement for you have to universally screen, but what
Correct.
that can mean in a lot of those districts is, oh, well, we administer MAP or some other instrument and we're taking a look at those scores. You know, we look for who the high flyers are there and we see if we have anybody that we need to move forward. I mean, I feel like that's something I heard from people last fall.
Yeah, but it's easy to do. It's easy to do. And if you're already providing that as a part of a regular assessment plan, then it can fit into maybe meeting compliance, but it's certainly not best practice. And that's where my research and working with you all on the COGAT as well is so helpful, because I want to make sure that we're catching all students, specifically from underserved populations as well. And given the unique population that we have here, there's a clear disproportionate number of white and Asian students, which is very much similar to the literature out there as well. And what can we do that fits the compliance piece, fits best practice piece? But there's one piece that I don't even know, Vic, if I brought this up to you, but there's a really cool part of Chapter 16 that does allow school districts to apply for special programming or special waivers. Though a lot of school districts can create different types of programs different from Chapter 16, I've always been afraid that people may use that special clause to do less, but I would like to encourage school districts to be thinking on the opposite end and to do more. So again, even though IQ is a high threshold here in Pennsylvania, we clearly know that there is bias that is written into achievement tests and cognitive assessments as well. And trying to be thoughtful of all of that piece, better understanding a high population of English language learners. We have almost 50 different languages that are spoken in our school district. So how do we make sure that we're being thoughtful of all of those different pieces for students that are going through universal screening? But then also trying to think of how can we make sure that students are getting services that are directly related to their needs. And in Pennsylvania, we really focus on our state assessment standards as what drives specially designed instruction for qualified students, which is either in ELA, in math, and even potentially in science, even though it's not tested nearly as often. And that's where school districts are often calling me saying, hey, tell us about what you do. And I say, I'll be glad to share what I do, but realize that my school district looks very, very different from yours. And what we do may be best practice or compliance for us, but may not be for yours. And I know that a lot of teachers are saying, I just want to do what's best. And it's not just as easy to paint that one brushstroke, clearly saying that this is the best thing that you should do, unless we continue looking at adjusting the criteria and being a little bit more thoughtful of, is our threshold too high? Is our threshold too high? Or are we being more specific with, for example, since IQ in Pennsylvania cannot withhold a student only, better defining what strongly indicates giftedness. So that's really, really hard. One school district, that has a university town like us can interpret that very, very differently. And that's very confusing for parents that come in through the state or are even moving within the state about what that looks like, because a child could have need for services in our school or in another school district and then come to us, and because of a difference in rigor and expectations may look very average. So that does make it really, really challenging.
And that's also part of what makes Pennsylvania so interesting. I mean, you have two major cities bookending the state, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and you have everything in between, from large urban to the most rural. So yeah, you do have a lot of variability in Pennsylvania to think about. So this is the slide that just called out the 130. So 130 is mandated to be served, but to get to that, they have to have been referred on to have the individual IQ assessment with the school psych.
Correct.
So to meet the strictest threshold, a whole chain of events has to have happened to get the kid in there. Now, what's nicer here is we say, well, a student with an IQ score lower than 130 can get in as long as we have some other things that strongly indicate. And that's what you were just alluding to, like, okay, so what is a strong indication? What else ought we be considering? And that's a lot of the work that that you're doing. I want to throw out just a couple of other things so that folks know some projects that we're working on at Riverside. Our research team just issued a report, which can be found and downloaded from our website, where they took a look at achievement data as well as COGAT ability data over the last few years, the pre-COVID, COVID kind of post-COVID effects. No surprise to anybody, you know, we're definitely finding differences in achievement data. We haven't seen a similar swing in COGAT scores. So we're going to be working on a cognitively speaking, where we're going to boil down some of the findings from that report and make them a little more accessible to some of our folks who are used to looking at the COG speaking newsletters. But additionally, what that really points out is if the only thing you're looking at on kids is achievement, right there you've built in a level of disadvantage for students. So demonstrated achievement is important, but there are lots of other things that are important as well.
Yeah, and that demonstrated achievement is something, in fact, I was just having a conversation with my school psychologist about this, is the difference again between school districts and what we're utilizing to say demonstrates a need. In Pennsylvania, we're really looking for students to be working a year or more above grade level. That is kind of the threshold we use when we say demonstrated achievement, to be able to say whether or not they need a GIEP or a gifted individualized education plan. Because we could have a lot of students that have you know, pretty high IQs, but are performance-wise in the local program is, you know, above average or whatnot, and can really be met with regular differentiation through the classroom environment. Then as we continue growing with our twice exceptional learners, you know, like heads are exploding, still trying to work through how to provide supports and services for them. And then again, if you're moving from school district to school district, the process may look very different in terms of what is going to provide student services. You know, I've seen across the state, if you're identified as mentally gifted, you get a special pull-out classroom that's part of your schedule. You know, sure, I don't know, are you doing connected enrichment experiences to the curriculum? Are you doing things that are disconnected and are doing more creative and fun things based on around student interest? You know, it's really hard to balance so many different needs and expectations. And that's the one thing specifically with our underserved populations we're really struggling with, because, you know, masking factors may be very prevalent, and race and gender and language ability are things that in the law are very clearly identified as masking factors. But then demonstrated achievement. How can an ELL learner really demonstrate their true abilities given the locally based assessments that we're providing, or even rates of acquisition and retention? What does that look like? That's really, really hard for them. So we're getting better at having the conversations of the identification under Pennsylvania law for mentally gifted, but then that whole other piece about programming and need is so much bigger. So much bigger. And there's a lot of different philosophies out there about that.
Well, when we take more of a talent development perspective, that's what really challenges me about what's on this slide. So if we think about the student who is not demonstrating in terms of achievement, not a year ahead, may not even be achieving on grade level, but has the talent, the innate talent and ability to access accelerated programming to then be able to meet grade level expectations and then even ramp it up and start achieving above grade level. I fear that this kind of definition, you know, leaves that student out of it. So the talent development perspective, as opposed to the strictly worded, oh, this kid is, you know, gifted on every level, versus, you know, here's a kid that's got the skills and we can get them there. They've got the innate ability and we can get them there.
Everything you just said is something that I fear and I struggle with on a daily basis, because I'm trying to meet compliance regulations, but then I have a large population of very talented students that just do not meet the cognitive IQ expectation. And when you break some of these down, we may not be able to say that they're mentally gifted here in State College, but another school district may. So what we've really been trying to do for several years is to ramp up the opportunities for acceleration and enrichment experiences to all of those high performing students, and not necessarily require a gifted IEP in order to access some of them. So as an example, starting in 3rd grade, we offer an advanced math class for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders that for some, again, our high achieving students who may not meet that IQ requirement can still be able to have access to that. We offer a subject level acceleration in math and in science for students transitioning to 6th grade. So all students are able to apply for that program. We provide them, if they don't have enough content knowledge to be successful yet, we provide them with additional support over the summer, and we test them again to see if they can grade level accelerate. If a student performs very high in a primary math class based on an end of the year assessment, we will move them up a grade level without requiring a GIEP or even an evaluation. So we're really trying to look at how we can continue to provide support for students that may not meet some of this criteria. And that, again, is really, really tough when you talk about parents really wanting sometimes that identification label.
So I've got one eye on the clock here, very cognizant of the fact that, as usual, I have way too many slides and we have some really interesting stuff to get to. So I'm going to start moving a little more quickly through these slides. So this just talks about the process in Pennsylvania. I don't think we need to persevere there. This is just that the state requires some degree of universal screening, but they don't say what that has to be. And this visual really caught me, the idea of a funnel that we start with many and we end with only one. And I think what you're doing is you're trying to expand the funnel, which I appreciate. This was just from a survey that you did internally. So saying, is there a formal universal screening? Only 40% of folks said, yeah, it really is formal. So a lot of these.
So, you know, this was done, I had surveyed an intermediate unit schools. So this is not specific to state college. This is a certain part of the state.
Right.
But it's pretty eye-opening though.
Yeah, and then this kind of shows the really the strictest interpretation of Pennsylvania's requirement is over here on the left-hand side. But then there are, you know, all of this is pretty amorphous. Rather than putting these in neat boxes, we should have put all of these in clouds, because it's like, what do these really mean? There's no definition around this stuff. So there's your challenge. And the reason I included this slide is because of this big bold statement on the bottom. In Pennsylvania, even if you get through the funnel, even if you jump over the hurdles and you meet the criterion for gifted ID, it does not guarantee that you're going to get any special services. Anything you want to say about that?
And again, that's a big challenge. And for a school district that has a large, robust opportunity of programming for students, this is something that we have seen is happening more and more here in our school district, where students may be identified as mentally gifted, but as they're getting older and having access to more programming opportunities and for things that we have set up for all students, we've seen that when we come to reevaluation times, we say, is the student still achieving more above grade level? Do they need anything different than what we're already able to offer to all students? So for example, our high school offers any course can be turned into an advanced course through our enrichment gifted support program. That's accessible to all students. Specialized counseling with the gifted support teacher, letters of recommendation, specialized study halls to work with students of like-minded peers. We even offer an Art Smart program where we have students who have gifts and talents in art to be able to come together for extra practice during the day. So really, that's something that we have shuttles that run students around our district and even to the university all day long. that's something that we can offer. So it's easier for us to be able to say, what does the student need that they're not already have access to, which again, I still question that. I still think that we could be doing better at that. But again, compliance wise, we're doing what we need to do. Whereas another school district would never be able to offer some of those things. And a student may have a GIEP their entire high school career. So that is something that in Pennsylvania is very clear. A student can be mentally gifted, but not in need of specially designed instruction based on how they're performing at the local level.
Well, I want to, I don't think we need to persevere over that. That's just talking about demonstrated achievement, which we've already touched on. So I want to start getting into something really cool that's going on, which is that we are working with you, Dr. Lakin and Riverside are working with you, Jonathan, and we're kind of embarking on a pretty interesting activity, which we can't wait to see this drive you over the goal line for your dissertation. I can't wait till I can call you Dr. Jonathan. But so one of the things that you all are doing in your school district is you are doing universal screening with the COGAT screening form, but the use of that ability measure is not a requirement in Pennsylvania. That is not funded by the state. So, you know, some folks there are using COGAT, some folks may be using another measure, some folks are only depending on recommendations and referrals based on how students are achieving. But you guys are doing the screening form universally for your third grade.
Correct. And we've bounced back and forth over the years, started with fourth grade, then we added in second grade, and then we kind of settled on third grade as a local decision based on what we were kind of seeing and what we really wanted to do. Obviously, with the level 8 and there not being a need for the English or for the language piece was an interesting piece for us to consider. But we really found that third grade would be a really good place to settle on as our universal screening. And I've talked with other school districts. I haven't found a right answer, and what works for us may not work for others. But we start that process in the fall of third grade.
So I have the sample items from the 3 different areas that are included in that level 9 screening form. So we are sampling from the 3 domains, which is a really valuable thing to do as opposed to looking at a single domain like a figure matrices screening, because these fundamentally are different areas of strength for students. But at the level 9, the assessment uses English language words. And so based on the conversation that you and I were having, you know, we have a concern about the accessibility of these English language words to some of the students in your district. So we embarked on some action research.
You want me to speak to that? Or
yeah, you go ahead.
Okay, so with my dissertation, part of our equity plan at the school district was to really ensure that our universal screening for giftedness was as equitable as possible. And with our collaboration with Vickie and Dr. Lincoln and the rest of Riverside, what we did is we screened all of our third graders on the level 9 that required the English language. Then COGAT went back in and rescored all of the third graders and produced an alternative screening form composite score for us to take a look at that removed anything that required that English language questions that had that English language connection to them to give us a new score. But then what I went back in and did is I also pulled all of our underserved populations within my sample that I'm looking at. And due to the research, within the research, I pulled our English language learners regardless of their race. I pulled all of our African-American students that were in third grade, as well as our Hispanic students. And I personally administered their level 8 form, which does not have any English language requirements as a part of the process. So that what I wanted to do was to take a look at how this underserved population looks at the level 9 form, looks how they look at to the population with the alternative screening composite, but then how do they actually look together the underserved group when we compare their level 9 and their level 8 scores.
So being very cognizant of the fact that your dissertation research is your dissertation research, and you got to own that. I did some very perfunctory analyses on these data, just looking at measures of central tendency, and I think that what I'm about to show you is going to add questions rather than answer questions.
I'm sure it will.
But I do want to point out to folks that one of the things that we have taken a look at is, you know, we typically think about the levels of COGAT being specific to a certain grade. So level 8 is typically thought of as the second grade COGAT. It's the last level where it's picture-based. But based on the way that the measurement is built in the assessment, you can actually give level 8 to older students without hurting their chances. So it has enough high end in it that you should be able to measure a kid up to almost age 10 using this level 8, which doesn't have a requirement for specific language. Using it in third grade is really not a problem. So most often folks say, oh, well, I'm testing for gifted. I want to give the harder level. You know, I want to go up a level because the test is harder. But I would encourage people to remember we're scoring kids, meeting them where they are. So when you give a kid a higher level of the test, I'm still scoring that kid as age 8. So I'm saying, you don't have to get as many items right as an 8-year-old compared to what a 9-year-old would have to do on this same assessment to get a high score. So when we give the level 8 to older kids, there is implicit in that a requirement that they need to get more things right to get a higher score. When we give the level 9 to younger kids, there's an implicit understanding in there they need to get fewer things right to get a high score. Okay, anyway, let's move on. So first thing I did is I looked at your full screening form level 9 versus your alternate screening form, which in essence is a QN composite for the screening form. And I just pulled some summary measures. So we tested 481 students. Of the 481, 473 of them were scorable on the screening form 9. What I think is really interesting about these two slides is if you take a look at the measures of central tendency, the mean, standard deviation, and the range, they're spot on. They match very closely if that's all we look at. Now, one thing that we do see here is that we had 8 kids unscored here and we only had 3 kids unscored here. So we had 5 more students who were able to be scored when we dropped the requirement for that English language-based subtest out of it. However, that does not tell the complete story, because what happened within distribution when we did this? So I saw scores change based on this rescoring for 32% of the students. And by score change, I'm talking about plus or minus more than 5 standard H score points. So when a kid is trying to make a cut score in a given district of, like, you know, our cut score is 120, even 1 standard H score point can make a difference. So the largest positive change I saw by going to the QN composite, the alt screening form composite, there was at least 1 student in there who gained 14 standard H score points. There was at least 1 student in there who lost 24 standard H score points. So what that tells you is we had some kids in there that were really benefited by pulling out the language requirement. And we had some other kids in there that it really hurt their scores and we took that away. And you know, all of this is the wonderfulness that you're going to get to delve into. And I do want to let those of you know who are on the webinar, as Jonathan moves forward in his analysis, we will be working with him and we will author a kind of speaking on this that talks about, you know, what we've learned from this. What is the best measure? Maybe there is no single best measure. Maybe it depends. The psychometrician's favorite answer. It depends. It depends on the student. It depends on the situation. So this was looking at all of your students. And I don't know, Jonathan, if you've even had a chance to dive into the data. Anything here that surprises you?
So I haven't run any tests yet. I'm almost to that point now with where I am in my dissertation. But when I was just skimming over the data, what I saw was the same. So for you to say that is exactly what I saw, that there were students that had a great benefit, that if we would present this data to the school, they may be more likely to say the student needs to be moved forward for consideration for evaluation. But then I would love to talk with my psychologist as well too about the other end of that. And I think that that's kind of what I have seen in the gap in the literature, is trying to best understand, is relying on the verbal component incredibly important, or isn't it? And that's where I'm so excited about this data, considering what that may mean for us as a school district. And that's, I like can't wait to start getting my hands into this and being able to then have conversations with our schools, because we don't just look at IQ, and we typically look at a composite score of about a 126 as our really like the lowest that we'll go. But we also look at other data pieces, including like students' percentile scores on the MAP. We take a look at other masking factors, demographic data, teacher input in a safe space, because I also know that some of our teachers don't still really understand what giftedness looks like. So we really try to make sure that our gifted teachers and our psychologists are a part of those universal screening discussions. But it really opens up the conversation of, now what do we do? It's not like I didn't really know what to expect when we just saw, and this is just the alt composite. Like we didn't even start to talk about the level, you know what I mean, the Form 8 yet, which I'm even more interested in.
Talk about that in a minute. So I want to come up and this is, whoops, that's not the way I want to go. I want to go back up. So this is an opportunity for me to give a shameless plug, which one of the things that these data tell me is that with the different content areas that we're covering, because remember, Jonathan did the screening form, so we are not getting separate full battery scores on these kids. But what this tells me is that these really are unique strengths. Verbal is a unique, measurable strength. And it's not a measure of English proficiency. It's not a measure of reading. It is a measure of how kids reason with linguistic and semantic constructs. Quantitative is a measurable strength, as is using nonverbal figural reasoning in novel contexts, because you don't see it here where we're just looking at the central tendency. Oh, well, okay, so the full screening form level 9 looks pretty darn similar to the alt screening form level 9 if we just look at the big bunch. But if I start drilling down and looking at individual kids, for some kids, that made a huge difference.
Yep.
So the work that needs to happen now is to get into some of the why on this. And I'm sorry, folks, we don't have that answer for you today. Okay, so the other thing that we did is we tested 52 students additionally with the screening form level 8. So again, just measures of central tendency, which now I have sensitized you all to know these can be very misleading. So our mean score was 99 when we did the full screening form. Our mean score on the level 8 was 98, so it was one lower. Standard deviation looks similar, range looks very similar. So the scores giving the level 9 and the scores giving the level 8 to the same group of kids when we're scoring them relative to the age at the time of testing look pretty similar on a central tendency point of view. When we went back and rescored to the alt screening form 9, overall scores went up. A little bit greater variability, truncated our range a little bit, which is not surprising because it's a shorter test. It's got 2 subtests instead of 3. But we also drop out the fact that we couldn't score a student here that we could score here and here. Okay, so are we ready for this next slide? I guess we're ready. What did we see in terms of change? Well, we saw some pretty big differences. And first and foremost, when I just compare the alternative level 9 to the level 9, I see score changes that affect about 30% of these 51 kids. The largest negative change is -24. Well, we saw that on the other slide. It may be the same kid. The largest positive change was a +9. When we move over to the level 8, and I'm sorry, I don't have the, why. We're not there yet. But when we move over to the level 8, we saw score changes for about half of the kids. The biggest increase was plus 24 standard age score points. That's awesome. For some kid, that is awesome. However, on the other side, we see almost the same change for some other student who did so much better on the level 9 than they did on the level 8. And, we have to unpack what is that really about. And then, just because I'm perverse, I also compared the alt level 9 to the level 8. So what I did here is whichever one I listed second is the one that I used as the base, and I subtracted the other score. So this is alt level 9 minus level 9. This is level 8 minus level 9. This is level 8 minus alt level 9. So again, we see that some students, and it's given that we're working with an extract level 9 and then a subcomposite of level 9, this is probably the same kid. A kid went up 21 here, a kid went down 22 here. These are probably the same kids. But when I compare just the QN composite from the level 9 to the full level 8, which includes a picture-based verbal component, I see score changes plus or minus 5 standard age scores for over half of the kids. So this is just the beginning. It's interesting. It's head scratching. I have no answers. That's why you're going to get the doctorate out of this, Jonathan, not me.
And this is the cool data that I'm really interested in taking a look at, because again, I'm really interested in also, and again, I won't be diving that deep into individual students in my dissertation, but when we look at what we'll be able to do as a school team and with the school psychs and my gifted teachers about diving into what this data means to actual to 1, 2, 3 students, it's really going to be interesting. And I'm super excited to also find out from my own next point of research that I do on individual level is, what may make the plus 21? What do we know about that child? What does that tell us? And then does that kind of match some of what a teacher may be seeing in the classroom as a part of their abilities and et cetera? Or what doesn't it tell us? And I think that can almost be just as powerful, if not more.
So this is probably the last thing you want to hear, but if I were going to make a recommendation to you, I would love to see you guys doing the full COGAT. because we would have a lot more capacity to understand these scores and these score changes if we were looking at full battery scores. But you know, one of the key things that this tells me is we are measuring different strengths and weaknesses and different scores for students. So we're really tapping into different reasoning abilities. My husband just got home again. Thank you, dear.
Sorry.
But she says sorry for interrupting. But you know, so we are really tapping into some real differences and being able to fully understand that. And we're also finding that some of the formats may be more accessible for some students than others. So, you know, what is the impact of going to a picture-based verbal versus a word-based verbal? Is there something systematic in these data that can help us understand which students are affected how?
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. I'm really excited to use that because, again, my goal in this is to create or to establish the most equitable program that captures it. But you know, to just rely on one or not the other seems that it does have an impact. And at that point, what does that look like for us as a district moving forward? It's going to be great conversations.
So I had a couple of questions. Again, I've got one eye on the clock and we only have 3 minutes left. I have a couple of questions that have come in on the chat panel, and it's really talking about, you know, we've been using the QN composite when we're at level 9 and up. We've been using that for our EL students, and we do consider that a best practice, but it's always worth giving that verbal battery and taking a look at how that student scored on it, because it can surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
There can be some big surprises in there, and since we provide you all the scores anyway, you know, no harm, no foul in going ahead and testing that kid with the verbal and seeing if it moves the needle for them. Another question that came in is, do we recommend allowing EL students to take a COGAT at a lower grade level? Do we then just give them the QN portions, or do we give the alt verbal? So if you're giving the level 8 to a kid who is not Spanish or English speaker, you want to use the alt verbal, but you're still getting a verbal score on that student. So there's no reason to just use the QN. But we're not necessarily making a hard and fast recommendation. Is it better to look at the QN on a level 9, or is it better to give them the level 8? But giving students in 3rd grade the level 8 is certainly an option if you think they would be benefited by taking the picture-based formats. When we've worked more closely with Jonathan and we understand these data that we're looking at a little bit better, we'll probably have a better and stronger answer for you forthcoming. I mean, this is just so preliminary.
Mm-hmm.
One person said, can you look at the subtest scores using the classic view report? And in fact, we do have the subtest raw scores. And I think that ordinarily, when it comes to identification, we would never look at subtest raw scores. But in understanding these data better, we probably will have to delve into those. But I would never use those for identification. They're not, subtest scores are not individually reliable at that level. So given that we've actually used our hour, do you have any closing thoughts, Jonathan? Because I'm going to move to my next slide, which is my commercial for upcoming webinars.
No, I don't. I'm thankful, Vickie, for our partnership and our relationship, and it's been really great working with you all because I feel very much supported, and it's not just a product; it is an actual collaboration that's student focused, and I really, really value what we have right now. So I'm thankful for all of you.
Well, you're doing interesting work, and we are just we're just tapping it at this point. I mean, we're really just embarking on this thing. So I'm sorry to tell you, I'm pretty sure we're going to be having you back next fall, if not sooner, to help
I
us
will
dive
be glad
into
to
what
be
the
here.
data tell us. And we'll keep track of some of these questions that came in today, and see if maybe we can answer some of those more fully when next we meet.
Sounds great.
Given that we've used up our hour today, I guess we'll have to call this to a close. There's a lot more we could talk about, and we will talk about. But Jonathan, thank you so much for the great work you're doing for students in State College and your advocacy in Pennsylvania. And thank you for taking time out to discuss this with us today.
Yeah, you got it. And thanks for all the help you're providing us. We really do appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday. Same bat time, same bat channel, where we're going to meet with the folks from the Center for Talent Development at Northwestern University. Thank you again for joining us today.